It's been about 6 months since I switched from the Panasonic Lumix G9 to the Sony A7 IV as my main camera for YouTube. So in this video, I'm going to go through some of the things that I noticed when switching from Panasonic to this Sony camera that I'm filming this video right now. The most obvious difference moving from the G9 to the A7 IV besides the sensor size is undoubtedly the autofocus system. In fact, the autofocus was my main motivator to switch to Sony, because I can't tell you how many times in the past 2 years that I had to reshoot videos due to the camera not focusing correctly or just like focusing just on a different object that I wanted it to be. And since this is my first time having a reliable video autofocus, I'm also learning about the different settings like autofocus speed and sensitivity settings to fine-tune the autofocus performance. But even at its default settings, the face detect autofocus on the A7 IV is just amazing. It feels like night and day compared to the DFD autofocus on my G9. And as a solo shooter myself, having a dependable autofocus system means that there's one less thing for me to worry about when I'm standing in front of the camera talking and making a video. But having reliable autofocus doesn't mean that I just stand in front of the camera and start talking. I still rely on an external monitor to ensure that my composition is correct. And that leads me to the first of many gripes that I have of the A7 IV. So when I connect an external monitor to the A7 IV with the HDMI info display turned on, the built-in display turns off. This becomes an issue because features like focus peaking and zebras, which I use for checking if my frame is blown out or checking for focus, aren't available on the external display. And if I wanted both the external monitor and built-in display to be on at the same time, I'll need to turn off the HDMI info display, which will in turn output a clean video feed to the external display. This means that the red recording frame which I use as a tally lamp won't be visible on the external monitor. And that's kind of inconvenient because when I'm using the teleprompter like right now, the flip out screen is kind of obstructed by the teleprompter. The point I'm trying to make here is that this wasn't an issue on my Panasonic cameras. The HDMI output showed exactly what was on the flip-out display, so things like focus peaking and the recording indicator are still visible when I'm using my Panasonic G9. Along the same lines, when using an external monitor with the A7 IV, the camera will actually overheat pretty quickly if I have the dual SD card set to simultaneous recording mode. Again, this is something that I used to do on my G9 a lot, and I never had the camera overheat before, even when filming in the hot Phoenix summer. But I kind of understand why this is happening. The Sony A7 IV does have a full-frame sensor versus a smaller Micro Four Thirds sensor on the G9, so naturally there's more heat being generated while filming a video. It is kind of a bummer that I can't do simultaneous recording to both of the SD cards at the same time, which acts as an automatic backup for my videos. But what I've settled on today is to record videos to a single SD card, as I feel that having an external monitor is more important than having an automatic backup, especially given that I'm using a pair of these pro-grade SD cards, which are one of the most reliable cards out there in the market right now. But switching gears to the form factor of both these cameras, it's a real marvel that Sony was able to package a full-frame sensor into this body. Like if I were to put these two cameras side by side, you would think that they would have similar specs, but in fact, the G9 has a sensor that is half the size of the one found in the A7 IV. In terms of the ergonomics, I have a slight preference for the G9's body, as I've pretty much grown to love its form factor. Plus, the grip on the G9 fits my hand more perfectly than the Sony A7 IV. As for all the customizable buttons, Sony does allow me to customize all the buttons to my heart's content the same way that Panasonic does. But the menu button in particular, I feel that is in a very inconvenient location on the top left corner. This means that I can't click into the menu when I'm holding the camera with one hand. There is an option to remap other custom buttons to act as the menu button, but then I can't remap the menu button to be something else, so I'm kind of losing an extra customizable button if I do that. Moving on to the software on the A7 IV, this camera has Sony's new menu system, which is supposedly more thoughtfully organized, and I don't have too much gripes with the menu system. It was fairly easy for me to pick up, and it reminds me a lot about the excellent menus on my Panasonic cameras. As for other parts of the software, I have a list of things that I'm just not a fan of. The first thing is the info display. All the icons being displayed on all four corners of the display feels a little cluttered to me. On my G9, the icons are placed only on the top and bottom of the screen, making it look a little more simpler and less cluttered. Also, the level gauge display, which I rely on a lot when I'm shooting B-roll, is only available in this minimal display mode with the exposure information on the bottom. And what drives me crazy is that in this display mode, the autofocus/manual focus icon is not shown. So I'm just constantly switching back and forth between these two display modes whenever I'm shooting B-roll. And speaking of switching between modes, I'm really disappointed with the memory recall feature on the A7 IV. So the memory recall feature allows me to assign a set of settings to one of the mode dial options. Like I have one for shooting talking head shots and one for shooting B-roll. But the problem for me is that when I'm in the memory recall mode, the option to set a custom white balance by pointing the camera to a white balance card is disabled. This makes absolutely no sense to me, and this limitation is why I've just given up on using the memory recall mode on the A7 IV. And this is yet another thing that I took for granted with my G9 because it didn't have such a restriction when I was in the custom memory mode. The last thing that hit me really hard with the A7 IV was the folder structures. For the photos, the folder structure made sense, but for videos, it just feels dumb. The videos are nested in the private, M4 root, and clip folder. This was something that I had to learn the hard way when I first started using the camera because I genuinely thought the SD card that I was using was corrupted, or I kind of forgot to hit the record button because I could only find my photos on the SD card. But after a quick Google search, I found out about this quirky folder structure. But at the end of the day, as much as I've ranted in this video about how Panasonic does most of the video-centric things better than this Sony camera that I'm filming on right now, I can overlook most of them as the autofocus on the A7 IV is just too good. I can go like side to side, front and back right now. It'll still be locking my face together. I could never do this on my G9 reliably. Like that's just not a thing previously. But yeah, let me know down in the comment section below what you think of this comparison. And if you want to see something else similar to this video, I did make a video about my Lumix G9 video rig a while back, so feel free to check that out. But yeah, that is all that I have for this video, and I hope to see you very soon in the next video.